Hi, everybody. Good morning. Oh, I love it when people talk back. My name is Erin Merchant. I'm co-presenting with Louise, who is up there on the screen. So hopefully all things will go smooth. There's a little sense of irony in using Zoom to do a presentation. But we'll roll with it. So, thank you all for joining us this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about leadership and management. A little bit different of a tone than I'm sure you're used to. This is my first time at the conference as well, so I expect that this is not generally a popular track, but it is something that's a part of our job. So, we thought we'd roll a little bit of diversity into your discussions over the morning. And we'll see if slides will advance. So, like I said, my name is Erin Merchant. You can find me on the Mac Admin Slack. I tend to stay pretty lean on what channels I'm in, but I am always open to having conversations, just general conversations. If you feel so inclined to follow me on Twitter, that's a whole different story. But I'm currently the IT success manager for Envoy out in San Francisco. So if you've used us for visitor management or are looking for a visitor management product, hit me up because I like staying employed.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm the disembodied voice over the speakers and the head you see floating behind you. I'm currently the client services manager for CBS Interactive for the East Coast and EU offices. You can generally find me lurking in Slack as Mac Lemur. Just be aware if you leave food out, I am going to eat it, especially cheese. And if you're bored, you can follow me on Twitter. There's usually nothing there other than food and comments and lemur stuff.
I think Louise's Twitter is probably way more entertaining than mine. So let's just get going and start with the easiest question of the morning. What we call leadership and how we are going to define that within the scope of this talk, because obviously there are a multiplicity of ways that this can be defined, and we don't have time to cover them all. So what Louise and I started having a conversation about is ad hoc leadership. It really started as a conversation about what it feels like to be in a role that's a little bit nebulous and maybe not totally defined, and how you can still have exert a certain amount of leadership within that scope. And what we ended up realizing is that anyone can be a scope, or anyone can be a leader in the scope of their organization. So that also means that though this talk might seem like it's specifically geared towards managers or management, it really means that there are going to be tools in here that anyone can walk away with. So for the sake of working within a traditionally functioning organization, we are calling upon those who are interested in participating in this style, and we are stating specifically, more specifically, that managers have a responsibility within leadership to create a space of growth and development for their reports. Doesn't mean you have to be a visionary. It doesn't mean that we're asking you to change the way you manage entirely from day one, but that you should be creating an environment that's right. And that's going to allow you to do what you do best and allow the people that report to you to do what they do best.
So one of the things we first had to do was define some notable styles of management and leadership and define exactly what they are. There are differences of style based on the people and then the companies. So if we go right into it, here are some of the leaders that we've identified. Two of the first styles are disruptors and micromanagers. A disruptor is someone who comes in, upsets the status quo, and defines a new reality. They're always looking for the latest and greatest management style, and the process gets blown up frequently. This can cause a problem for direction and just management because the team is unstable, there is no direction because it keeps changing, and staff is continually shifting, trying to keep up with new practices. A micromanager, that's kind of simple. It's the person who always watches your every move, questions every little thing that you do, and they're a control freak. They frequently have difficulty relinquishing control in practice and around decisions. It's a very top-down focused structure. Direction only comes from one place and one person. And it's like the old IRQs, if we remember those from Windows. It's interrupt driven. You're doing your work, the micromanager comes in, stops you, and then you have to change again. Then there are two other types of leaders, hands-on and hands-off. The hands-off is laissez-faire. Basically, that person lets you do whatever you want, maybe. Lets the staff do their work, but sometimes can be really, really disengaged. This leads to holes in decisions. Management's by the group, but there's nothing definitive. There's no definition of what you have to do. The next one is hands-on, and they work like an individual contributor. It can be positive because they're in the trenches like their reports, but they have no vision. They can't see anything beyond what's in the trenches. It can also undermine the direction of their leadership because nothing is formalized. Your staff may feel that they're more like a peer and not a manager. So if you give direction, they're like, I'm not going to listen to you because you're just kind of one of us.
So that leads us to the last one that's on that list. And what we found is that it's a little bit more nebulous, one of my favorite terms. It's something that's relatively new, and it's somewhat unexplored, though there are probably a few who have actually trailblazed this before us. But what it came from is that our contributions as ad hoc leaders and into our management didn't really fit in the molds of the ones that already existed. It also turns out that the mold doesn't exist. Like, that is just the fact. And there were hallmarks in particular that we found were relatively unique to this style. So we distilled them down. And what we found is that all of these people managers, and apologies, I would rather you see Louise, so you just have to listen to me, is that they were participating in a culture of transparency. They were also having candid conversations, both within their management structure, but also with their reports and their ICs. And that there were every functional improvement that was gained towards the business was participated in as a partnership. So what that really came down to was that there's a commitment to building trust as the focal point of the relationship and as their managerial style. So let's pause for a minute and let's talk about why we are managers, why I'm a manager, I think why Louise is a manager. And what that really comes down to, and this is probably more resonant outside of simply having manager as a title, is that we want to create great experiences for our employees. We are representing the values of the company through positive ideals, that we want to support someone and we want to see them succeed at small and large exercises, and that we want to, in a small sense of the world, trailblaze to help others rise up into our position and ideally higher than us. However, we know that this comes with a certain amount of responsibility, and that to our employers, and that means that we have to have organizational aligned goals, we have to provide metrics, we have to provide them with an understanding that our reports are going to be productive. It also means that we have to probably write a really solid SLA and fulfill that SLA, give excellent service, and then obviously we straight up just have to keep the lights on. So doing these things means that you are successful. It means that you're doing the work, you're doing your job, and that you're probably not doing this, which is great. But there's still a best practice around doing this. So one, that can be improved upon, and what that is a level shift of your focus from the day-to-day to something that's a little bit more bigger picture and a little bit more holistic. And we called that the guidance counselor. So we couldn't really come up with a name for it, but this felt very synonymous. So it's great because it's human first. So what you're doing is you're not looking at someone in the context of only their job description and as a servant of the company that they represent. So we're not saying that we don't understand that it's a job, it's still your job, therefore do your job. But what we're saying is that there are things you can do within that that make it more palatable and more likely that people are going to want to give their best. That being that you want to create a culture at a one-on-one level that is megaphoning to your reports that you are committed to the work that they do and not just the job, and you're committed to the person doing the work. So a lovely little side effect of this as well is that it creates a sense of corporate stewardship. Because it allows for the people who feel this support to personally interpret it like your mission statement or your core values or whatever the hell you want to call them within your organization. It also means that the contributions of that person is really about the work and rather just what they churn out.
So when you foster a human first type of environment, this makes discussions around happiness, career expectations, growth, and feedback conversational. Makes it easier. Remember, conversations around them should be happening on a regular basis. So taking a quick pause for a second. Erin, can you account? Anybody here who's a manager, how often, well, actually anyone here, how often as a manager do you talk to your staff, or do you talk to your manager? Do you do this yearly? Quarterly?
Anybody?
Monthly? Bi-weekly?
Weekly? Weekly? That makes me so happy.
Extra
There were lots
credit.
of weeklies.
That is actually a very good thing. That means that, as you'll see further on, that nothing should be a surprise. So extra credit. Does anyone do pulse checks? Not to see that you're alive, but how things are going.
Yeah, got a few hands. I see some nods.
Yay.
Cool.
So the answer is it's the cadence that's right for you in your report, as defined by you, and both of you really. Remember that human such a part and the situation. You can build a good management culture without the stick. This also decreases the amount of reactionary and disciplinary conversations. Remember, feedback. So if you see someone going, a little bit astray, you have a conversation, bring them back by having regular conversations. Even if your feedback and comp revisions happen on a half-year, yearly basis, you're preparing someone to basically advocate for themselves for a promotion, a raise, to help them and help you create a tailored and actionable plan to get them there. And you have a social contract between you and your reports to help get them there. Nothing should be a surprise. And nothing being a surprise goes both ways.
I'm really stoked to hear that most people are doing this on a weekly cadence. It means that this is more reinforcing than it is hopefully new information for anyone. So obviously we've talked very grandly about what this looks like, but the idea of this was to make sure that you had something that was a little bit more practical to take away with you. So what does it look like in practice? And then we'll talk a little bit about what you can actually practice to make this really, to make this stick. So mixed metaphors, lots of them, but we called it following the yellow brick road. And that's more in theory. And what ultimately it feels like in practice sometimes is that you are painting and laying the brick road as you go when you're in these situations. So again, this isn't just about great ideas, but we want to actually talk about what this looks like and what changes that you can communicate that are going to benefit you as well as those who are around you and in your tutelage. So we'll get in the Wayback Machine, not the Wayback Machine. And based on the conversations that Louise and I had about us not really feeling like we fit into one of those managerial styles or molds, we ended up redefining what were important to us down into 3 pillars, essentially, that we think make good managers really, really great. And it didn't really matter if you are a first-time manager. I am a relatively new manager, and Louise is tenured. So, but it didn't matter. It was just something that was relatively universal. And so what we found are that these three things, mentoring, guiding, and feedback, were practices that were extremely effective, and they were effective in helping us get our people where we wanted them to go or where we want them to go, as well as things that have been applied to us directly in our career trajectory. And on top of that, it has the lovely side effect that all of these are really excellent peer-to-peer tools as well. So the first being mentoring. We'll talk a little bit about what this actually is. So really what they come down to is, are you asking some fundamental questions? And those being, do you know what your reports are interested in learning in the short and the long term? Do you know where they want to be long term? Not just like what they want to do, but where they want to be. Do you discuss that on a regular basis? And do you see and do they see a growth path for themselves within the company that they are currently employed? So the other part of that is letting go of some old school thinking that constantly feels like it reappears in these conversations. So when you're asking someone about their future, you might be putting them on the spot to commit to something that feels way more grandiose than they're ready to have a conversation about. So rather than asking them, do they want to commit forever, just ask like, what do you want to do? Where you want to be? What do you want to do next? So we know that careers can also be nonlinear. So it's acknowledging the fact that sometimes a nonlinear path to get where you've gone or where you are today is good, and that your career trajectory might continue to be nonlinear, but surrounding our same industry, and then supporting someone in that. And then it's really about it's really about redefining what a career stands for, and not just what someone wants to do and then what they want to aspire to do, it's what they want to do and what they want to aspire to do, rather than what jobs are available within the finite space of your current employment and or what is out there. Basically, don't marry yourself to the idea of a job description, and marry yourself to the idea of the thing that you want to do in the future.
So the next pillar is guiding your staff. Sometimes we've heard it called molding your staff. You're not taking Play-Doh, turn into a masterpiece. You're not building a golem. It's more like you have a gym partner. You are there to inspire someone. They will inspire you, to keep you motivated, someone to keep you honest, and someone to challenge and push you just enough to improve on your own. So that is how you can view your role with your incumbents. You're that gym partner, getting them in shape to go to the next step. Now, for a very important part, a key part, is feedback. Now, we know this is a whole other talk, but we're going to distill it down to some of our basics. And this is some of the things that you should be thinking about. Feedback should be clear, concise, and to the point. Yes, those last two are redundant, but we have to make sure that we're very clear on what we're saying. It should be actionable with context. It should be very situational. When they're doing well, let them know when they're doing well. Celebrate, even if it's incremental success, you should celebrate it and let them know that they're doing well. Do you tell your reports that you're doing well every day, week, month? Let them know, because this is good for morale. If there's no feedback, they don't know what's going on. They don't know if they're doing well or if there are issues. And if they're not doing well, be honest about it and do it consistently. Again, you should emphasize in the context what is not going well. And you should have concrete examples of what's not going well, and then what you can do with actions to course correct it. A side note that this is different from team feedback, team success, blockers, or fails. There are tie-ins. It's a whole other conversation. So for example, if you're trying to bake cookies for a lemur, but somebody didn't get the baking pan aluminum foil, Is that the team's fault? No, that's the person who didn't do that's fault. Now, part of feedback. Get ready to be uncomfortable. Yes, humans do not like to be uncomfortable. We try to avoid it and run away from it. Acknowledge to yourself that both giving and receiving feedback is going to be very uncomfortable. Remember when we said do it often? That makes it easier. We're very happy to talk about any of our methods of success. Just not right now because we're on the clock.
So let's talk about the practical. You're ready to start laying some bricks down. Where the hell do you start? Because that's the other thing. All of these are very large and very heady, and they don't change overnight. So we've stressed those three things, and we think that those are the fundamentals of how you can get there. That's mentorship, guidance, and feedback. Regular one-on-ones, yay for all those weekly folks, and yay for those who are getting there. One-to-ones are super important in this process. They are so, so important. And the reason why they're so important is having those regular conversations allows you to build trust, which means that you're going to be able to have better conversations. So let's put some tools in your tool belt and talk about what you can do to make those conversations easier as they are coming along. One of those things that you can do is you can set some guidelines or some ground rules for your conversations. How much time do you want to spend on development? How much time do you want to spend on conversations around your day-to-day? My personal preference is that you should really be spending 10 minutes and not really any more than that on the day-to-day, and 20 minutes for free-flowing conversation or career development or just getting to know someone. You can also find some common ground on language. That's a huge part of this. You know, having the ability to communicate effectively with someone means that you are actually sharing a certain amount of your language. So that means that you have a discussion about how you want to structure those conversations and what those discussions look like around feedback. Is just having a casual conversation enough? Do you or they want notes that will help guide you through that conversation? How important are reoccurring questions in that conversation? So are there things that you revisit every single week and it's literally the same question because you want to take a pulse check? That's totally cool. Or do you just want to like really get into the nitty gritty, and do you want an agenda? Like sometimes that helps. So for feedback, specifically, like finding out how that person is going to be able to receive it effectively is really important as well. So do they do best auditorily? Do they want it written? Do you want it in both ways? Do you respond really well to a direct statement that feedback is coming? I think the best example of this is the radical candor movement, right? Like it sets you up in a position, I see a nod. It sets you up like, hey, I'm going to give you some radical candor. And the person doesn't feel blindsided because they know that that's now going to be encapsulated in that space. And then what expectations do you and they have for that feedback? And the delivery of that feedback. Is this exploratory? So is this something that you're noticing a pattern and you want to revisit with them just to make sure that they stay on the right track? Or is this something that is more indicative of an immediate action plan? And are you prepared to present that? So then there's also the general question of like, do you just feel like it's hard to talk to your reports or to your peers on like the same level? Like you're like, man, we just are not on the same wavelength. I know that that's a huge challenge for me, is just having an understanding of how someone communicates and when I understand that they are actually receiving and digesting that material. So it sounds super hokey, but one of the things that I've called upon is personality tests. It goes back to the language thing. It really builds a fundamental way that you can create common language that maybe you don't have the time or the skill set or the desire to define yourself. There are a ton of examples out there. Myers-Briggs is super popular, 16 personalities. We found one recently that my whole company is like super into called Crystal. It's taken people by storm. And then there's also apps there are plenty of feedback apps out there that are individual if you as an individual want to implement one. But there are also a ton of platforms that are available if you aren't using one already. And that would be super awesome. I know that also might mean more work for those of us in the room because we'd probably be the ones spinning it up. But just think about how awesome it would be to have a really effective conversational and feedback system that's organizational wide. I am happy to chat. We are happy to chat about our personal favorites around that, but we're not going to plug anybody in particular here today. So the other thing about this is that you really need to be asking tailored questions. You don't want to go for like the easy stuff. You don't want to go for like just other than a simple greeting, right? Hi, hey, how are you? Like that doesn't really get you anywhere. So don't go for small talk. It's bait. And go for questions that help you learn about somebody as an individual, what their motivations are, and how they are operationally excellent or how they want to be operationally excellent. And here's my one big tech slide that you can only half see, so even better. These are not all my questions, but I like to dump them up there for reinforcement, but these are some of my favorites. Obviously, we'll make the deck available as well, so you can have these. But these are things that have been super successful and that I've heard other successful managers and people in leadership ask their reports or individuals in their company or just people that they want to get to know. And they ask them with frequency and repetition. There are also things that have been utilized or like used on me in developing my own career. So I've been a recipient of these questions as well. And I found them to be very effective. So take it from me. They work.
So if you're following the yellow brick road, you'll reach the point in your career where you'll face the empty nest. The challenge with this is aligning our requirements of our manager's position with the company and an honest commitment to our individual contributors' desire to grow their career. What we're basically saying is that by focusing on the latter, it will be easier to do the former. If you've created a dynamic one-on-one that is focused on like the mentorship, the guidance and feedback, you give them a sense of ownership and autonomy. Through the above structure, and you commit to the needs of your reports, understand that each one needs a different touch and style of communicating. You've laid a solid foundation for the team expectations, ground rules, deliverables. If you've done all of this, you're creating a proactive environment that inspires them to have focus, enthusiasm, and a commitment to excellence for their work. And all you've done is focus on the individual human. So there are two ways that this is going to go down. One is that you'll be able to provide someone with an internal promotion based on their desired trajectory and that of your team. Hooray! Hooray for you and hooray for them. This is everyone's dream. You've been a great manager. You've helped someone grow and go on. You've helped them move or created a position that's advancing their career. And lucky for you and your head count that you don't have to lose a head count. That part is worse than bad feedback sometimes. But sometimes that's not entirely available. But there may be something available internally or elsewhere. Have you laid the groundwork for that person to feel comfortable to talk to you about discussing movement to another team? Have you advocated for their movement? Meaning you know they want to go from, let's say, being a Mac admin to InfoSec. Have you talked to the InfoSec team about, hey, Jimmy really wants to move on? Are you encouraging it? You shouldn't be pushing them out saying, you should go for it, you should go for it, based on your feedback and conversations. There's slight encouragement and it should feel natural and organic. But that should ultimately be the goal. Remember, this is human-centric. You're helping someone get where they want to grow. Potentially it's a short-term loss for your team, but as a manager, it is your goal as a leader and manager to help your staff move on. Now, the other part of this, however, is the uncomfortable part. Despite your best efforts, sometimes the internal path is just not available. But if you've had conversations around career development and their desire to advance, and you've built a rapport of honesty and trust with them through the previously mentioned structures, it's probably time to ask them the question, how do we get you here? Or why are you still here? This is a really, really hard conversation to start. I wouldn't want to lose talent. None of us want to lose talented, engaged, dedicated employees. But being a great manager means that you help them succeed. You're providing them a nudge. You're not warning them or saying, hey, you're not happy. You can't grow here. You should move on. But a little nudge that there's opportunities that are bigger than the company. You are their biggest cheerleader. And it's a great ego trip, honestly, in that they realize that, hey, I'm lucky to have you. Any company would be lucky to get you. And truth be told, you're doing right by the company, nudging someone on to a bigger and better career, because then the door is open for someone who is eager and young to grow, and then you can rinse and repeat the process. This, however, is an extremely long conversation. It's not an extended cut of a one-on-one. This is a conversation that you should return to with consistency and frequently, but only if your person is open to having it. It is not a conversation that should be forced upon them. It can only happen if you have that rapport with the person. But if they're open to exploring it, emphasize that as a manager, you cannot tell them what they should do next. We should never define success on their behalf. They need to be confident and feel supported in the next steps in the journey. But you let them know. You're not forcing them out. There is no deadline for their movement. But what you hear from the continuing conversations, it will validate your exploration of it. What are they saying that's not available to them internally now? What are they doing that doesn't provide them growth or happiness in their regular day-to-day jobs? What are they doing they would like to do more of? These are also basically standard one-on-one questions and feedback. But if you have that relationship and candid feedback, you will know when your staff has outgrown the nest and when you can have the conversations. And if you've done well, they'll have the confidence to move on.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about what we do and what we particularly intend to do for others, which is a hallmark of our job. But at the same time, there's a secret side effect of this, and that's that you should also be checking in with yourself. Haha, surprise. Self-care is super hot right now, so let's just jump on the bandwagon. But it's even better to have an opportunity to apply it to your own career.
So, what behaviors do you as a manager model that show that you're taking your own medicine? If you have a good relationship with your staff, they'll be able to smell your BS. Are you authentic around their development and also yours? In truth, it's best if you practice what you preach. A simple example is don't say, do what I say, not what I do. If you got a good relationship, your staff will call it out and say, hey, you know what? You say tune out when you're on PTO, but you're on vacation. You're at a cafe eating crepes and drinking Mai Tais, yet you're responding to emails. I feel obligated to do that. So practice what you preach.
So the other part of this is also what you do when you're preparing to have these conversations and what you can do for yourself during your preparation for these conversations. So all of these should come from a place where you've checked in with yourself first. It's an opportunity to make sure that you're good where you're at, but also that you are separating the mentorship that you're providing for that person with your own career development. If I'm not mincing words, that's essentially like, are you projecting? and making sure that that's not the case. So now I'm going to totally contradict myself and say that projection is a little bit okay. The reason why it's a little bit okay is that as long as you're not doing it in a way that directly conflates with the actionable conversations that you're trying to provide to someone, then you're good. What you don't want to see is you don't want to see your ambitions actually be tacked onto someone else. But more likely when you're in the conversations, the opposite is happening. You're not necessarily projecting, but what you're doing is in the conversations that you're having with someone, it's causing you to remind yourself that you need to be checking in with yourself. And that's even better. So it's a little bit of a snake eating its own tail sometimes, but it does usually have a positive end game. And keep checking in with yourself. Actually do that regularly for yourself as well, because this conversation applies to you as well, especially if you're in a management position, because I think that sometimes we forget that we are somebody else's IC.
So we come to an important topic, the monster under the bed. How the hell do you think I'm qualified to help you with this? I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I had the fear of steering someone wrong or saying the wrong thing, the fear of being uncomfortable. I have a fear to speaking to a non-homogeneous group and feeling unprepared to talk to said groups. I have the fear of candid feedback in career development, and that feedback being perceived as having a lack of values. I have the fear of deprecated morale of having conversations with someone. How do I become comfortable with an acceptable level of discomfort and having sometimes tough conversations? We've christened this the Imposter Monitor. It's a wonderful little name. It's still a terrible, horrible, vile little thing. In the end, it's simple. It's just fear. Missteps are going to happen. No one is great at this overnight. It's really on how you course correct when you make these mistakes. Just rip off the Band-Aid and go right in and do it. If you make a mistake, you course correct. This just simply takes practice.
Can we emphasize that enough? So then there's the part about this, why make these changes, right? There's a little bit of a novelty factor to it, for sure. They're not new. These practices are not new, and we're not trying to coin anything new. We're simply trying to re-emphasize something that's been a little bit more fragmented throughout our practice, and something that I particularly have noticed is a little bit fragmented throughout our particular departments and our representation within our larger organization. So what that really meant to me was that we've had a lacking understanding about how to create a sustainable team structure versus the right team structure within IT. Like what's right for you, what's right for your organization, what's right for your team. We're so operationally driven. We have to open ourselves up to have a willingness to embrace change that's relational as well as technological. We're really good at the latter, and we're not always super great at the former. And we have a tendency to be really, really comfortable with recreating our teams around our next big thing. So our next build, our next rollout, or what's on our roadmap. And have that be what defines our management structure, that we're technology first and not whole picture first. The other thing that's great about this is that it does get you to operational happiness, which sounds super hokey, but it's a really lovely place to be. It gives you an opportunity to have better accountability around your roadmap, and that's both to the people on your team, but also to the organization as a whole. It also usually means that there's more transparency around who you are and what you do and why you do what you do. It also means that you have a lot more opportunity for team-based ownership, which is super awesome. It means that you have people who are really engaged in their work and want to do it well and feel a sense of ownership and autonomy around it. It also means that they're going to be participants in some of the bigger picture things, which is great when you're trying to mentor them into that position or if they expressed an interest in it. It means that risk policy conversations, what your SLA looks like, the choices you make around automation as well as implementation may actually be contributive from your team. And it also allows for them to communicate that as an individual up the management chain. So it means that they can speak more effectively to who you are and what you do and why. And most importantly, it means that those who are under you and that you work with feel heard and that they feel understood and that they feel supported, which is really what we want to see from this fundamentally at the base. It means that those people who are individual contributors now, those of you who are individual contributors now, are soon to be really super awesome leaders. So we really stuck with distilling it down to Tina Fey's quote here, which I think you can only partially see, so I will read it because it's awesome. In most cases, being a good boss means hiring talented people and then getting out of their way. And who does not want to be like Tina Fey? So we left a lot of time for questions because I hope that you have them. We're totally open to answering anything that we can, both about our own personal struggles with like getting to this place and how we work on it. But if there's anything that's coming up for you, we're here. But thank you for joining us this morning. We're really stoked to have you. Also, I really love throwing the catch box. Yeah.
Is this on?
It is.
So I have a little bit of a different situation, is that my direct reports are student employees who work for generally a maximum of 4 years and a maximum of 20 hours a week, but often as few as 8. So obviously checking in weekly is not really in the cards, especially since some of them don't even work except on weekends or after 7 p.m.
Totally.
Do you have any suggestions for how to
build
a rapport with some of those students?
Louise, can you hear them too?
I heard that, yes.
Okay, great. I totally get it. And that's what I mean about like taking a little nugget from all of these, right? Like I thinking back to, I obviously work in a completely different environment from you. So thank you for, like validating that as well. I would say just like take the questions that are pertinent or take the ways that you can help that person get prepared for their career as a whole, right? Because I feel like that's the other thing I do. I also do a lot of chats with high school and mostly high school students and like the fear and terror you see in their eyes that is like pre-college, right? Like I feel like there's something there that once you're in college that you can still help somebody, like boost somebody to be like, just get ready. Just get ready for the real world because it's coming. I mean, do you feel like they need more guidance or mentorship for you? And that's something that you're trying to improve upon?
It varies a lot based on the student. Some of them I end up with a rapport with either because they work during the day while I'm there or because we have more in common. But it's sometimes difficult to, say, give feedback to a student who you've noticed their tickets have not been right or that they've messed something up when you've literally met them 3 times or they don't come in very often while you're working, and you don't want to come off as like, I don't know what else you've been doing, but I saw that these tickets were messed up. And just always giving, because you only find out about the stuff when something bad happens, right? Nobody says, oh, this student was super helpful. I mean, occasionally, but.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it, I think, is going to be situational. So for some people, you have to ask them, let me help you. Now, if they don't want to be helped or they don't come in, there's very little that you can do about it. I don't think you can force a change upon them. But the ones that do have the rapport, even if they work on weekends, just little nuggets, a little check-in, I think will go a long way into building a positive rapport and feedback and give them a little confidence because they'll know that you're being supervised, but my supervisor isn't here. But if my supervisor has the proverbial open door policy and is at least answering questions or questioning me, that will go a long way to building confidence.
There's also something to be said for pulse checks being appropriate for those kinds of relationships too, right? Like They're a little bit more transient or finite since you're only going to have them for 4 years, maybe less. So maybe going for 3 questions instead of the whole like, what do you want to do with your life questions, right? Might be great. And being like, hey, I'm noticing X. Can you tell me what's going on with that? Can you provide me like an update via email, like on the weekly, like, or I only see you every 2 weeks. Can you just let me know what's going on? Like send me a little post report so I can ask you some questions. And even though it's not face to face, you know, like, well, then we can start having like a dialogue, and then maybe I can help you out remotely, or I can help you out when I'm not in the office. Not that I want to create more work for you when you should be enjoying your downtime, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Cool. There's somebody, I see you.
Just a question. If you have an employee who doesn't like doing the one-on-one, so like I've tried backing them off month to monthly. I've tried sending like questions in advance. I've tried just keeping it open and not having any questions in advance and say, here, what do you want to talk about? And I'm here just to answer questions. Like, how do you kind of like engage with somebody like that, or do you just, as long as they're doing their job and getting things done, you just back off on them?
That one is a very, very tricky question, so I'll try to navigate this minefield a little bit. If I heard you correctly, you did say that they're at least doing their tickets.
That's correct. Yeah, they're getting their job done. I mean, super effective.
Okay.
He's been there for like 15 years, so I can't like, rock the boat too much with him, but I'd really like to just kind of get like a better relationship.
Again, it's going to be situational. You don't want to force it on them, but you can let them know that this is part of performance. I need to do some pulse checks. Yes, you are doing your job. So that's the positive reinforcement of you're doing your tickets. There are no complaints. You're achieving your goals. But I also still need to know how you're doing as a person. And, make it monthly. You'll set the cadence with them, maybe make it a monthly check-in for like 15 minutes and just go there and see how they're doing. I won't quite say use the stick, but let them know that, hey, I need to know how things are going. Is there something that you want to do? And if they're just happy being a tech, plugging away, doing tickets, then that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's one of those things like you don't want to force somebody to like share, right? Like I'm definitely not saying like sit in a circle and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and look deeply into each other's souls. Like that's not what we're going for here. Make sure that we get Louise back, hopefully. Unless my machine just totally died. Is there an admin in the room? Uh-oh. Yeah, I might have. Unsuspectingly. No, I got one in there. Oh no, Louise. Yep, she just told me she dropped. Anyway, while I'm doing 2 things at once, let's see if we can get this back. My machine's also been kernel panicking lately, so that might have something to do with it. I think there's something to be said for not rocking the boat if the person isn't comfortable doing a regular structure of one-to-ones, but like if you're their manager and that's something that you want because you want to write them an effective review, which I also think is like, it's the flip side of the same coin, right? Like I don't think a lot of people hear this. Like I'm not trying to force this thing upon you because you need to do it, but it's so I can advocate for you in an accurate and awesome way, right? A really good friend of mine is one of the proponents for that, and she actually set up that cadence with her manager specifically. She's like, I'm going to be on the I come to you cadence. And it works for them because she actually committed to that. So when she did want to check in, she put the time on his calendar. It made her responsible for that. And it improved their rapport immensely. So there may be something to it, right? Like where you're saying like, we're going to check in quarterly because I really need to take that 30 minutes or that 45 with you so we can just see how things are going with all the work that you're doing, like the scope of work that you're doing. And then outside of that, like if it's literally just like a drive-by, by your door or whatever, it's like, hi, not dead. Like, great. Cool.
Louise has to call her back on Slack for more questions.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody? There was a hand in the back.
Hello. All right. So my question is, how do you handle being a manager or a leader in an organization that doesn't empower you to act as a manager or leader?
Oh man, why did you ask me that? I'm gonna go. Takes a lot of self-motivation. Do you have the desire to do that?
Well,
Answer a question with a question.
yeah, so I think a lot of the responsibility comes down to the person in the role to take the initiative. But what I see a lot in my organization is even people who take that initiative, they're just roadblocked at almost every turn.
Yeah.
Like they try to get people staff development, they can't do it. They try to promote someone, they can't do it. They try to provide one-on-one, nope, can't do it. You have to do it a certain way that doesn't facilitate that empowerment.
That's really tough. I think there's something to be said for situations like that where I would love to have Louise answer this for you too. So we might need to revisit this question. There is definitely something to be said for that kind of scenario and giving people micro leadership initiatives, right? Like where you kind of like throw them into leadership and they don't really know that they're actually taking the lead on something. That way that if they are committed to staying in that company, that they are like getting a little nugget of that thing that they desire or you desire for them. I mean, the other thing that I will say that is, excuse me while things come up, that is kind of, it's the harder part of that conversation is that might actually be the time to suggest to somebody that they should go elsewhere or that you should go elsewhere because you're feeling like there's privilege in saying that depending on like what is actually available to you. But if we'll step back, right? Like I'm going to re-preach some of my slides. If you set up enough communication with the person that you can have conversations around that struggle and be transparent without also not being disingenuous to the privacy of the actual company, then you might actually like be putting the right bug in their ear to get them where they want to go, or maybe you can reformulate the way that they can work within their own position, right? That's a really tough scenario. Yeah. I wish I had a better answer for you on that one. I struggle with that as well. And I think that there's a lot of people who would identify with that as well. Does that help? Does it help a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. You can say no. Because I want to make sure that we this is another thing, like simply having the conversation helps with a lot of that stuff. I will say too, right? Like actually just being like, this is the state of the universe that we live, right? Like that's the thing, like a lot of this is theoretical until it's not, which is why like if you take little pieces of it, then you can maybe apply it in such a way that puts somebody in a position of more comfort as well, knowing the limitations of your organization, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it's frustrating on both the report side and the management side because you end up sitting in the room, both of you just with your hands up, like, we can't do anything.
I can actually, I'll give you a personal scenario. I legitimately ran into this situation in one of my previous positions, and that was what my manager and I were doing. And the extra crappy part in that for me and him was that I loved where I worked. I was like having a great time. And I loved working with my manager. I felt super supported. But the truth of the matter was the organization just wasn't in a position to give me any more room for growth. Mm-hmm. And so eventually, like, that was one of the reasons why I got to thinking about like why this is so important is like he nudged me out the door. Like he was the one who put the bug in my ear that was like, you got more shit you got to give to this world and we're not doing it for you anymore. So go. But I stuck it out for a long time too. Like I really tried to make it work. Right. So you said it better than I could. It's like ultimately it comes down to the individual.
Okay. Thanks.
And try again. Call the lemur. We'll see. Anybody else while we're doing this? I'm really proud of myself for doing some tech support of my own. Ayo.
Hello, sorry about that. The interwebs went down.
Except for I'm not. What audio did you have to change? Do you have to change an output again?
Yeah, headphones.
Which I am. Okay. Anybody else? That catch box is being held high. Well, cool. I don't want to make you all stare at me. Just for fun.
It is kind of fun.
Is it?
Yeah, 15 minutes left just looking at you.
I learned a statistic too that's actually like if you pause for like 3 long seconds, then people are more likely to be ready to talk again. So I should be better about that too.
I'm not a manager myself, but I have a manager who is eternally frustrated and always threatening to quit. So, and he says this in the weekly meetings. I understand his frustration.
Yeah.
But it's not very good for morale for the team, and wondering if you have any suggestions on how to handle that situation.
Well, let's start with the question of, let's see what we've got going on here. Nada. I was going to say, it, like, clearly you said it like best first, right? That it's having an effect on morale. Is that feedback that you've given to this person?
No.
Have you considered
my
giving
boss,
feedback to
yeah.
this person?
Oh yeah.
I would say do it. That's where I would start, honestly. Because it's not in putting you in the position where you're trying to shut down the transparency, right? Like the rawness of those feelings. But the person does have a commitment to you to balance the rawness of those feelings with the reality of making sure that you all are well supported in their role. That should being the key word, right? Like we're human, we're imperfect. But it might go a long way to know that, like, for your manager to actually hear from you, like, look, man, I hear you, or look, person, I hear you. But, like, it makes it hard for me to do my job when I hear this from you on the regular.
Yeah, I think it makes me more uneasy than my team members, because my team members haven't worked in
Sorry.
My team members haven't worked in the private sector, I don't think, as much as I have. So when management changes, usually employees change.
Yeah.
A lot of times. So I think I probably feel more threatened than they do.
Oh dear. Louise, we might need to call you back on Zoom again. This is going really well. Yeah, I don't know. All right. Well, yeah. That is a challenge. If you also don't feel like that's something that you can have a conversation with your direct manager about, I would suggest, if you have the ability to go up the chain, go up the chain. Because that's totally something, right? Like, and that feels a little circuitous. I know how crappy that can feel too, being like, holy crap, like I'm totally outing someone in this scenario. But it may actually give you, or I mean, like, and I know that this is squirrely depending on where you are, if you're comfortable talking to like your HR or your people team or whatever your turn of phrase is, that's another place where you can go to have those conversations, or at least work out how you want to have that conversation as well. I've leaned on my people team quite regularly to, at least it was like my pre-conversation where I'm just like, I just want to play this out with you. Like, can we just talk this out? And then gone back and had that difficult conversation. They can also be an advocate for you in the room if that's something that like they have the scope or the capacity to do. Like I said, I think this stuff goes 2 ways, honestly, right? Like it's a little bit of a slight to say it's only applicable to managers. Like I give this kind of feedback to my friends all the time. Like, that place sounds like garbage. Like, leave. What are you doing? Right? Like, but it's true, right? Like this is really a peer-to-peer tool, which is why I think that you should really, like, if you feel comfortable giving that feedback, you really should. Like, you should start that conversation. Also, great ad hoc leadership, right? Catchbox over there.
Okay, so in
Oh,
my
man. Questions that start that way. Okay, so.
so in my role,
Oops.
I'm on elementary campus, and on that campus, I'm kind of like the leader.
Uh-huh.
And then as a team whole, our director is the leader, right? So I guess my question is, how do I have conversations with my peers that are non-leaders about our leader and favoritism, or the feeling of favoritism and micromanagement when I might be one of the favorites?
A little humble brag there. Nice. No, I'm into it. That is a uncomfortable place to be. Also, good for you for being a high performer. Pat yourself on the back. I think that's awesome. Let's get the Leams back in here. Hi-yo. Hopefully she's back. Yay. I should unmute. We can hear you now.
Yay.
I give up. Computers are the worst. Why do we do this? All right, let's give this a go again. Do you mind repeating your question now that we have Louise on there?
So my question was, how do I talk with my peers about our leader when they feel that there's favoritism happening or micromanagement happening just to them, not to me?
Did you catch that, Louise?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So talking to your peers about your leader when you feel there's a lack of communication.
Well, not so much lack of communication, but when they feel that there's favoritism happening.
Favoritism, okay.
Yeah, so and the two-part of this was, how do you have a conversation at a peer-to-peer level around that communication or about the favoritism? And then how do you either, I'm assuming, encourage someone to have a conversation with your manager about the favoritism, or you yourself have that conversation as well?
So like,
Am I breaking that down?
yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really know what the question is, because
I
I've had the conversation
Yeah.
with my boss
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
I've had the conversation with them, like the nudge, like, so then maybe this is not the place for you, you know?
Yeah.
I've had those conversations, but it just doesn't ever seem to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like he has tried a bunch of different techniques to bring teams together and to bring like his relationship with them
Yeah.
up, you know,
Yeah.
as like some of the things that you've said, you know, and like we all have weekly check-in meetings and we all have a different style for that check-in meeting. So
That's
like
awesome.
it seems like
Yeah.
he's trying,
Yeah.
but then there's still that like that
just
he's
not
not doing
unity,
enough,
like you're
and
not
whatever.
unified.
So it's kind of like, so then bye, but
Yeah.
they don't want to.
Right. Like, it's always difficult to like be like, yeah, totally, just do the thing, because I also don't understand like the pulse of your situation, right? Like, I don't step into your office every day. But it sounds like you are also interested in solving this problem. Like, you as an individual are interested in solving this problem. So if you feel comfortable having those conversations at a peer level that aren't just like bye, but maybe like giving someone, again, the hard feedback, shocker, is there a theme here, right? Like that attitude is having an impact on morale, and that it's not creating a good environment of cohesion around like what you could really be doing as a team. That might be more impactful coming from you than coming from the manager, because if they're already not feeling supported, right, like that's not something that you should, like, it's cool that you have concern, but it's also not something that you need to solve, right? Like, there's also this aspect of this is like, sounds kind of jerky, but like looking out for number one, right? Like, because, you know, and then you can add it into the self-care conversation of like, if you're not solid where you are, then you're probably not good and solid in representing someone else. if you want to take a positive spin on that, I think a lot of practices around like team empowerment are really useful, and they're like little micro things that you can do. This might be repeats if anybody's heard me talk before. But like just leveraging someone else into a position where they feel like they're the authority in the room, right? Being like, yo, that was a really great idea, and saying it in an open space, right? Like being like, hey, I was talking with so-and-so and I want to elevate this thing that they said or whatever, right? So it's basically giving someone else an opportunity to feel like they're in the spotlight, and like you be the person who's spotlighting them, even if they weren't necessarily prepared for it. Because it means that you recognize them, right? Which maybe that is the thing that they desire. It's not necessarily that it's like favoritism. It's just that you have like you've come to a good space where you're communicating clearly with your manager, and they may not be. And they're seeing that disassociation, right? Like that might actually be what's going on. It may not.
I think, Erin, you hit it right there on the head there. We can kind of flip it. It's basically boosting signal and being an ally. So if a manager is favoring someone, you can repeat what the other person said and say, wait, hold on. Jimmy said something. Jimmy said this. Jimmy, can you elaborate on it? And if you bring the focus over to that other person, that might begin to change the perception of them being unfavored and giving them an equal footing.
Yeah, peer-to-peer leadership, right? But I'm also like, those who know me know I'm not somebody who minces words, so people get like pretty straight up feedback from me, right? Just in general. And of course I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, but I do think that there's a place for that, right? Like if you've been dodging around like exactly how you feel about this, it might be time to like use that radical candor method where you're like, okay, great. Keep being direct. I think that's right. Like, cause it also means that you're being clear about the things that are not working for you and the things that are not working for your team that you want to see improve. That's really like the thing that's, I think, the most important, is making sure that you do put a little spin on it. That's not just like, you're being a jerk, and more of being like, I want to see us improve as a team. I want to see you improve. I want to advocate for you to feel included on this team, right? Those are the things you really want to strive for. So whenever you're thinking about giving that feedback or having those conversations or leveraging, make sure that those are the things that are in the back of your head to do it.
I definitely feel like in my department, I am that like second leader.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do that to the people that are like unheard, you know, and I try to make them heard.
Yeah.
And I try to make them feel valued. And like, I'm nudging somebody out right now because I'm like, you're done growing. Let's go somewhere else. And then for the people that are like the negative Nancys, I'm just like, well, I'm not going to do that for you. You know, it's like, it's kind of like a favoritism there too. It's because like, you keep going. I'm trying to nudge you out because you maybe need to not belong here. You're not happy. You're making us not happy.
Yeah. Some people are just wired that way too, right? Like there is a little bit of just like general acceptance, which is hard. That's super hard to do. It's just being like, if that is the way that they are, then, you know, finding a way not to work around them, but work with that. That's also not severely impactful to you. The other thing that just bubbled into my head is that you should feel empowered to set up one-on-ones with all these people on your own. I check in with my teammates, like people that are on my same like cohort level all the time. It's not a regular thing that we do. So if that's something that you want to do, whether or not you're in a position of leadership or you're doing this ad hoc leadership, like you should be pulse checking with your teammates outside of the scope of your work. That's how you end up working really well together, right? So maybe try that methodology where something is a little bit more formalized, because it also might give them a little bit more of a safe space, being like, hey, I just want to grab a cup of coffee with you on the regular, right? Like, can we do that every 2 weeks? Is that cool? Like, I feel like something's going on and I just want to like check in with you or something, right? Like,
I want to emphasize what Erin said right there. Having meetings with your peers that are not quite within your group, but you interact with, is extremely important. In my previous role at CBS, I managed desktop engineering. My clients were client services. I had monthly one-on-ones with almost every manager at every site. So these were outside of biweekly larger team meetings. I was able to get a pulse on what is happening, if we had a problem tech, or there's a miscommunication between our teams. So if we saw favoritism or a negative Nancy, we were able to address it really quickly, and issues that might bubble up or blow up were dealt with very quickly.
Does that help? Give you some starting places? It's challenging. It's super challenging. And sometimes, I mean, there is a little bit of the aspect, right? Like I want to end everything on like a super positive note, but like sometimes these things just don't change, right? And then there's also the thing that you need to be doing with yourself is checking in. Is this the right environment for me? So make sure that you're doing it from like all angles if you're committed to like really seeing this through. Good luck. You got this. I believe in you. Yay! See, there, you got a whole team in this room. I will say too, I mean, shout out to the community, because one of the reasons why Louise and I started like thinking about this so significantly is that I spend a lot of time being very verbal in jobs chat about things that I'm like, no, I don't like that. But like that is a great place to lean on. It's super, super helpful because you do get a wide variety of different kind of management styles that are in that space. But on top of that, you get a lot of peer-to-peer conversations exactly around like situations that you're in right now. I've heard and seen so many scenarios that I personally haven't run into, but I feel like has made me more effective at preparation for if and when that happens, right? Like it's like the biggest knowledge base that you'll ever be able to utilize, and it's constantly evolving. So highly recommend it. We're here for you. I'm here for you. You can always direct, like I chat with a whole bunch of people on the regular about where they want to go in their careers via DM all the time. I also do resume review, which I should probably be careful about like putting out there because I'll overtax myself. But yeah, like that's why we set this up, is we just want to see everybody in that room succeed. So we here for reals. Yeah. All right. No more questions. Cool. 3 minutes early. Thanks everybody for coming.